Hello everyone, Inquisitor Vaughn here, and in today's video we are going to continue with our Necron deep dives by going into the Sarnekh dynasty. Now I'm pretty sure very few of you, if any of you, have heard of the Sarnekh dynasty, and I'm also sure that if you've been following these Necron deep dives that I've been doing, all the dynasties are starting to sound the same. The Sarnekh, the Mefrit, the Nihilek, they're all starting to sound very similar. However, the Sarnekh dynasty is by far one of the most interesting Necron dynasties that I have done a deep dive on, and I really do think people should know about them more. I would love to see them on the tabletop, and I know I say that about every Necron dynasty that I do a deep dive on, but for real, these guys I really like, and we're going to get into why that is the case. The Tsarnak dynasty has a dynastic territory very firmly in the Segmentum Pacificus, which is directly west of the Sol System and Terra. Now, in regards to the dynastic Ankh of the dynasty and its heraldic color, I had to do a bit of digging, which I enjoyed, of course, and the results were very interesting. In the 9th edition codex, we are provided with a presentation of the Sarnakh dynasty's dynastic territory, and like with all of the dynasties on the map, it is marked with the Ankh of the dynasty, which is this. However, when doing deep dives and looking at the lore pages that I usually look at, the Ankh wasn't listed along with the information for the Sarnakh dynasty like it is with most other Necron dynasties that I'm able to do a deep dive on. Because of this, I went on a search for it and I actually found the Ankh of the Sarnakh dynasty. But here's the thing though. The Ankh that I found and the Ankh that is shown in the 9th edition map are two different Ankhs of the same dynasty. This makes sense in a way that I will spend a large chunk of this video explaining. In regards to the heraldic color of the Sarnakh dynasty, it also wasn't presented in any of the usual sources of information that I use for my deep dives, but just like with the Ankh, it was in my face the entire time. A quick Google image search of the Sarnakh dynasty will show a really old Necron model from when GW models were made of metal. This Necron model, described as a Sarnakh dynasty Necron, was painted in a primarily white scheme with silver joints, and the necrodermis on its weapon was red. If you follow the images that are listed in correspondence to this image, you will see a lot of Necrons in a primarily white color scheme. This is when it dawned on me. I've seen this scheme before. And so I rushed to my library, I retrieved the sacred tome that is the 8th edition Necron Codex, and I turned to the Necron miniatures section. Lo and behold, right in the middle of the page, a white colored Necron with a red weapon was featured. However, it was simply described as a Necron immortal with a Tesla carbine. I am sure that this model is a Necron immortal of the Sarnakh dynasty, so why was it not listed as such? I don't know, but I'd like to imagine that it is because it makes sense not to list it as such because of their lore. And if it was because of their lore that they weren't listed as such, then that would make sense. So we have established that the Sarnakh have two different Ankhs and the heraldic color scheme is white, which is a really cool color scheme for Necrons. But before we move forward with the deep dive, allow me to continue nerding out over why I love their color scheme. So before Warhammer 40k, there was Rogue Trader, and in Rogue Trader there weren't any Necrons, but there were beings called Chaos Androids, which were Chaos-possessed machines that many considered to be the precursors to the modern Necron faction. The reason that I bring them up though is that when you look up Chaos Androids, one of the official schemes for them was a primarily white scheme with a red cased weapon. Now, there is no connection between the Chaos robot lore of the Chaos Androids and the nature of the Sarnakh dynasty, but I did want to point out that the Sarnakh dynasty technically has the oldest Necron color scheme ever, predating even when the faction itself was as expansive as it is now, and predating Warhammer 40k itself. which is seriously cool. And if you don't think so, then I don't know what to tell you. Okay. Technically, if we are speaking about the faction as a whole, the Sarnekh have the oldest scheme. But if we're talking about the oldest scheme of the faction as the Necrons in Warhammer 40k, and if we could assign a dynasty to the color scheme of the Necrons before they were divided into dynasties, the blue and gold scheme that is featured in some of the oldest Necron models indicates the Nihilak dynasty as being one of the oldest, which could be why they're considered the richest dynasty in the lore, because they've been around since the beginning. But anyway, back to the Sarnekh dynasty. In regards to the history of the Sarnekh dynasty, available lore ties the history of the dynasty to its crown world of Zappanek. According to the lore, during the War in Heaven, the fleets of the Sarnekh dynasty held out against an Eldar fleet of incalculable size. The resulting cataclysmic battle left the crown world shrouded in the wreckage and debris trapped in orbit from both fleets as they apparently blew each other apart into mutual annihilation. This battle was amongst the last battles of the War in Heaven, and the lore goes on to say that during the 60 million years in which the Great Sleep occurred, the crown world was both protected and shrouded by the clouds of both necrodermis and wraithbone. The current pharaoh of the Sarnekh dynasty is a Necron overlord called Thazzar the Invincible. Thazzar is actually not the original pharaoh of the dynasty. We aren't given any information on who the original pharaoh was, but we are given information on its current pharaoh, Thazzar. Thazzar was an overlord of the Sarnekh dynasty who was exiled by its noble court to the planet Athenos, where he rested during the Great Sleep. We aren't given any information as to why he was exiled, but we are giving information on the circumstances of his awakening. While he and his forces slept in Necron crypts beneath the surface of the planet, it was settled on by the Imperium and became an imperial world. Athenos is a shadow-shrouded world categorized as a civilized world, but it is barely that. According to the world's lore, governance of the planet is vied over by dozens of rival families. Just like on Necromunda, warring royal families means foot soldiers for the cause of each one in the form of gangs. The gang warfare, which is fought openly in the streets as well as in the sewers of the hydroponic gardens of the planet, are both brutal and unending, which means the planet is a perfect recruiting ground for the Imperium of Man, of course. For this reason, the world actually has its own Imperial Guard regiment called the Athonian Tunnel Rats, who specialize in urban combat and are some of the most determined close combat specialists of the Imperial Guard in the entire Imperium. When the Overlord Thazzar awoke from the Great Sleep, and he activated his massive tomb ship, which was buried under the surface of Athenos, it caused earthquake tremors across the entire planet. And when the tomb ship broke away from the world, it destroyed Athenos' capital. Despite this, the world as a whole was left overall unscathed, and the only intentional display of might from Thazzar was toward a stealthed Eldar listening post in the planet's orbit, which he promptly destroyed before moving on from the world, completely ignoring the human population that had settled on it. I just want to clarify that he himself did not destroy Athenos' capital. He just removed his tomb ship from the surface of the world, and that removal destroyed the capital. So he completely ignored the population that had settled on it and just moved on. The thing about Thazzar is that he awoke from the Great Sleep before everyone else in his dynasty. After leaving Athenos, he made his way to the crown world of his dynasty, which was called Zappanek. Once there, Thazzar reprogrammed the Tomb World's protocol to acknowledge him as the dynasty's pharaoh, and he made those who exiled him into his servants. From this point, Thazzar turned the once glorious crown world of Zappanek into Zappanek, the Reeve world, and the center of his piratical kingdom. Sifting through the debris clouds around the crown world, he amassed a fleet of ships, and this fleet goes on raids which menace both the lesser races of the galaxy and other Necrons as well. According to available lore, Thazzar's pirate fleet not only prowls real space, but it also prowls the webway, which is a big deal. The webway is an ancient extra-dimensional space cut off from the warp. It is a labyrinth of pathways that was both created and used by the Old Ones millions of years before the emergence of humanity. In the Necron Deep Dive video, I mentioned that the Old Ones were able to travel from one side of the galaxy to the other side of the galaxy just by stepping through a gate. The webway gate is what I was referring to. Though the webway was damaged when the chaos god Sarnekh came into being and whole sections of it were blocked off, it is still used by the Eldari and serves as a transportation means for the species, as well as a temporary abode for the Drukhari, aka the Dark Eldar, and their city of Kamora, from which they themselves go out into the galaxy to raid. This means that Thazzar's fleet and forces fight against the Eldar in their own playing field. An interesting thing about Zappanek is that it too was settled on by the Imperium, and while it is fully a tomb world and not a civilized world at all like Athenos, there are humans on it. However, Thazzar has yet to realize that humans are actually sentient beings, and so he ignores them as if they are insects. Humans are to Thazzar what ants are to us. He sees them, he knows that they are there, but he ignores them and does not consider them a threat or of any significance. It's hilarious because it's like the attitude toward humans. He doesn't get that they're actually intelligent people, like intelligent species. But it's also scary because I wonder how it must be living on a tomb world and being surrounded by Necrons all the time and not knowing when they're going to turn on you. Because while Thazzar and his forces ignore the humans can't ignore the Necrons, right? So it's like, imagine the psychological strain that is put on the humans on the world of Zappanek. The Sarnekh currently fight against the Eldar, from the regular Eldar to the Harlequins to the Exodites to the Drukhari. Thazzar has beef with all of them. But the Sarnekh under the leadership of Thazzar also take from other Necrons as well. If we look at the dynastic map, we see two other Necron dynastic territories near the Sarnekh dynastic territory, namely the Thocht dynasty and the Ogdebek dynasty. So I am sure that the Sarnekh dynasty are a nuisance to them as well. Okay, so going back to the heraldic color of the Sarnekh dynasty, I have a theory as to why Thazzar might have been exiled. I think it was because he stole from other Necrons and he possibly used the enemy's weapons against the enemies themselves. The color of their previous Ankh, which is purple, hints at the possibility that their color scheme was different at one time, like the Ankh design itself. I asked myself why their color scheme would be white, and I came up with the idea that their scheme is white because it is the color of Wraithbone. In their lore, Zappanek is shrouded not only with debris of living metal, but with Eldar Wraithbone as well. In the formation of his ragtag pirate fleet, who is to say that he did not also use or utilize the wreckages of Eldar ships and the Wraithbone that they were made from? If we look at the image of the miniatures for this dynasty, they literally match the description of the clouds of debris around Zappanek in that they are composed of living metal and Wraithbone. Now, why would Thazzar use Wraithbone? Besides it being resistant to damage and it managing a degree of self-repair similar to Necrodermis, it also provides psychic protection for Eldar vessels against warp entities similar to a Gellerfield of an Imperial ship. And what this potentially means is that Thazzar could be using Wraithbone as a form of protection against psychic attacks from the Eldar, whomst they fight frequently. Using Wraithbone also could give the Sarnekh dynasty an upper hand against other Necrons, as Necrons are particularly vulnerable when it comes to psychic attacks. The use of Wraithbone as a form of psychic protection could very well be the source of Thazzar's title, Thazzar the Invincible. Invincible because he's invulnerable against psychic attacks. Going back to the Ankh of the Sarnakh, usually the Ankh of a dynasty tells a story or the history of the dynasty that uses them. We have no information on what the original dynastic Ankh represented, though it would be fair to think that it represented their dynastic territory in some way. In regards to the current dynastic Ankh, we don't have any information as well or any context for its meaning. But I would like to put a theory out there that will seem super cheesy and kind of silly at first, but will be convincing by the time I actually state the theory. If we look at the Ankh, it is simple, with the characteristic handle that makes it an official dynastic Ankh. It retains some elements of the original Ankh, just without the complexity. A part of the Ankh that stood out to me was the perfect X shape made around the center circle. That and the prominence of the middle circle made me think of a symbol that I had seen somewhere before. Then it hit me. The Jolly Roger. There is nothing in any GW official lore that says that this is true or even remotely hints at it being the case. But if we are to take into consideration the fact that the Sarnakh's last battle in the War in Heaven was a cataclysmic fleet engagement against the Eldar, the heavy pirate theme of the current Sarnekh dynasty, and we combine it with the fact that this is the dynasty's new Ankh under the leadership of a Necron pirate king who rules a crown world turned reef world, who basically stole his own dynasty, who steals from other Necrons, who uses enemy weapons against them. It is not out of pocket to speculate that this new Ankh of the Sarnakh dynasty is based off of the skull and crossbones symbol associated with pirates. We've already established that the color scheme of the Sarnekh is actually just based off of an older scheme for the Necrons. But I do want to reach even further. I want to make a correspondence that is going to break the fourth wall and go into the real world in an hopefully harmless way, right? I'm sure that no one in GW planned this part, right? But the original pirate flag was red and white. So the flag itself was red and the bones, the crossbones, the symbol was white. Now the red and white of the Jolly Roger original flag kind of matches with the red and white of the Sarnakh dynasty, which is I found to be interesting as well. I'm pretty sure 100% that Games Workshop did not think, oh my gosh, we're going to connect this heavily to pirates, but I just wanted to make that correspondence. And that has been my deep dive of the Sarnekh dynasty. Like with all my videos, I'm just going to go over a few of the points that I made in this video about the dynasty that I talk about, right? So the Sarnekh dynasty has a dynastic territory to the west of Terra in the Segmentum Pacificus. Their color scheme is white. Their heraldic color scheme previous to the white is unknown, but the current color scheme is white and the carapace on their weapons is red. The current pharaoh of the Sarnekh dynasty is Thazzar the Invincible. Thazzar reprogrammed his Tomb World's programming to accept him as the pharaoh and turned his nobles or his higher ups into his servants. He basically stole his own dynasty, and he used the wreckages of the ships in orbit of the crown world of Zappanek to build a fleet. And this fleet goes on raids on other Necrons and fights against the Eldar in the webway, which is super cool. So my thoughts on the Sarnekh dynasty. I think by far this is the most interesting and fun Necron dynasty that I have done a deep dive on, because I just love the idea of a pirate Necron fleet. You know, like as someone who loves playing Battlefleet Gothic and who loves the void warfare aspect of Warhammer 40k, to hear about a Necron dynasty that faced off against a Eldar fleet almost 3 times its own size is exciting. To hear that, you know, the battle was so crazy that they basically blew each other up into like bits and pieces, to hear that the overlord Thazzar became the pharaoh of his own dynasty by essentially stealing it, is it's just fun. It's like the war in heaven never really ended for Thazzar. He has serious beef against the Eldar, and so even as the dynasty's pharaoh to this day, he still hunts down and fights against the Eldar, which I found to be so cool and so interesting. I love the color scheme. I love the white carapace, and I know I kind of reached with the correspondence between the color of the necrodermis and the use of wraithbone, but it's not out of pocket. If we go back to the Tsarnek dynasty and we go into their lore for the dynasty in the deep dive video that I did, we find out that the Ankh of the Tsarnek dynasty Necrons is actually made of Noctilith, which is an anti-psychic material. So if the Tsarnek dynasty can use the Ankh and use Noctilith in their design, and like, for example, with the Nefrek, they can use living metagold. It's not out of pocket to assume that the Sarnekh dynasty would clad themselves in wraithbone covering because it benefits them in some way. But what that equals to is a really cool looking Necron. It's like silver joints with white carapace, and I think that's just so cool. If you like the idea of pirates, I would recommend the Sarnekh dynasty. If you like playing Battlefleet Gothic, because there are still people who play Battlefleet Gothic, I would recommend the Sarnekh dynasty. If you want to play a pirate themed Necron fleet, definitely go with the Sarnekh dynasty. I would love to see more people playing the Sarnekh dynasty. The thing about it is, though, I don't know how they would translate in a tabletop like a Warhammer 40k way, unless I think of like if you want to do an air wing detachment, which is all flyers, then do the Sarnekh dynasty. I'm pretty sure there are people who paint their Necrons white, but it would be cool if someone brought back, you know, the lore and the idea of the Sarnekh dynasty, the pirate kingdom. But with that said, there's nothing else to say. So Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.